You Won't Die Today. Rejected Omega. Took care of the wolf cub until Alpha King changed her fate. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are, and subscribe to our channel to receive new stories every day that will touch your heart. I hope you enjoy the story. The snow fell like whispered prayers across the forsaken woods, each flake a tiny benediction upon a world that had forgotten mercy. Jade knelt in the white silence, her breath forming clouds of warmth in the bitter air, her fingers trembling not from cold, but from the weight of what she held. A wolf cub. Small. Dying. Its silver fur was matted with blood that bloomed like dark roses against the pristine snow. The creature's golden eyes met hers with an intelligence that pierced straight through to her fractured soul, and in that gaze she saw a mirror of her own abandonment. "You won't die today," she whispered, her voice cracking like ice beneath uncertain footsteps. "Not here. Not alone." The words were a promise she had no right to make, spoken by a woman the pack had deemed worthless, cast out into these frozen depths where unwanted things went to disappear. But Jade had learned that the unwanted often recognized each other. Bound by invisible threads of shared suffering, she gathered the cub against her chest, feeling its faint heartbeat flutter like a caged bird. The forest watched in ancient silence as she carried her fragile burden deeper into the wilderness, away from the territory that had rejected her, toward the small cave she now called home. 3 months had passed since the rejection ceremony. 3 months since Alpha Marcus stood before the entire Silver Moon pack and severed their bond with words sharp as winter wind. "Jade Winters," he had declared, his voice echoing through the great hall. "You are weak, barren, and unworthy to stand beside an alpha. I, Marcus Thornwood, reject you as my mate and cast you from this pack." The pain had been exquisite, like her chest splitting open to reveal a hollow where her heart should be. The mate bond snapping felt like dying and being forced to continue living in the same breath. She had fallen to her knees as silver threads of connection unraveled, leaving her gasping, drowning in air that suddenly felt too thick to breathe. No one had helped her rise. No one had met her eyes as she stumbled toward the pack boundary, blood from her bitten lips staining the snow behind her like breadcrumbs she could never follow home. Now, as Jade laid the cub on a bed of dried moss and pine needles, she pushed those memories down into the dark place where she kept all unbearable things. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, built from necessity and nights spent learning to survive alone. She cleaned the wounds carefully, her touch gentle despite the roughness life had carved into her. The cub whimpered, and she found herself humming, a lullaby her mother had sung before the fever took her, before Jade understood what it meant to be truly alone. "There," she murmured, wrapping the small body in the only blanket she owned. "You're safe now." The cub's eyes drifted closed, its breathing steadying into the rhythm of healing sleep. Jade sat back against the cold stone wall, exhaustion settling into her bones like sediment at the bottom of a river. Outside, the wind howled its lonely song, and somewhere in the distance, wolves called to each other beneath the indifferent moon. She wondered if they were searching for the cub, if somewhere a mother mourned. But the woods remained silent of approaching footsteps, and as the hours passed, Jade understood that this small life had been abandoned too. "We're the same, you and I," she whispered into the darkness. "The ones nobody wanted." Dawn broke with hesitant light, painting the world in shades of pearl and silver. Jade woke to find the cub watching her, those remarkable golden eyes alert and curious. Relief flooded through her so suddenly she had to blink back tears. "You're still here," she said softly, reaching out slowly. The cub sniffed her fingers, then licked them with a tiny pink tongue. Something inside Jade's chest, something she thought had died with her rejection, stirred weakly back to life. Hope. Dangerous and fragile as morning frost. She named him Ghost, for the way he had appeared like a spirit in the snow, for the way he seemed to haunt the edges between life and death. Over the following days, Ghost grew stronger, He followed her through the forest as she gathered wood and checked her meager traps, his silver coat gleaming like starlight given form. Jade talked to him constantly, her voice filling the silence that had become her only companion. "You see that tree?" she would say, pointing to an ancient oak twisted by centuries of wind. "That's where I found mushrooms last week. Poisonous, but beautiful. Like most dangerous things." Ghost would tilt his head, listening with an intensity that seemed almost human. The winter deepened, and with it came hunger that gnawed at her ribs, cold that seeped into her marrow. But Jade endured, because Ghost needed her, and being needed was a gift she had forgotten existed. She gave him the larger portions of food, wrapped him in warmth while she shivered through endless nights, sang to him when the wind screamed like all the ghosts of her past mistakes. One evening, as purple twilight bled across the sky, Ghost began to behave strangely. He paced the cave entrance, whining low in his throat, his ears swiveling toward sounds Jade couldn't hear. "What is it?" she asked, rising slowly, her body aching from the day's labor. Then she heard it too. Footsteps, many of them. Voices carrying through the trees, accompanied by the distinctive sound of a large party moving through the forest with purpose. Panic seized her throat. Hunters? Rogues? Or worse, wolves from her old pack, come to finish what the rejection had started. She grabbed Ghost, pressing him against her chest as she moved deeper into the cave, into the shadows where the firelight couldn't reach. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a prisoner desperate for escape. The voices grew closer, clearer. She caught fragments of conversation. "The trail ends here, Your Majesty. Search the area. The prince couldn't have gone far in his condition. Your Majesty. Prince." The words registered slowly, their meaning taking shape like figures emerging from fog. Alpha King. They were searching for a member of the royal bloodline. Jade's breath caught as understanding crystallized with terrible clarity. She looked down at Ghost, at his silver coat that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly quality, at his golden eyes that held far too much intelligence for an ordinary wolf cub. "No," she breathed. "You're not just any cub, are you?" Ghost whined softly, pressing closer to her, and in that moment she knew the truth. The royalty of the Wolf Kingdom didn't just rule. They were born with power that marked them, set them apart. Silver fur like moonlight, golden eyes like ancient coins, magic that ran through their bloodline like fire through dry grass. She had been caring for a prince, and now his people had come to take him away. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She was a rejected Omega, living as a rogue beyond pack boundaries, in possession of the Alpha King's son. They would kill her. It wouldn't matter that she had saved him, that she had kept him alive through dedication and sacrifice. Rogues were less than nothing in the eyes of pack law. She should run. Deep into the forest, away from the voices and the inevitable judgment. But Ghost was still healing, still weak. He wouldn't survive the flight through the frozen wilderness. Jade closed her eyes, making a choice that felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. "You won't die today," she whispered to Ghost one more time. Then, with trembling hands, she set him down and stepped toward the cave entrance, toward the wolves who would decide her fate. The search party stood in a semicircle before her cave, their forms backlit by torches that turned them into figures of flame and shadow. There were at least 20 of them, all battle-hardened warriors in their prime, their eyes glowing with wolf light in the gathering darkness. But it was the figure at the center that stole her breath and stopped her heart. He stood taller than the rest, his presence so commanding that the very air seemed to bend around him. His hair was black as a raven's wing, falling to his shoulders in waves that caught the firelight. His face was carved from some artist's fever dream, all sharp angles and masculine beauty that bordered on cruel. But it was his eyes that held her frozen, wolf eyes that burned silver in the darkness, ancient and knowing and utterly merciless. Alpha King Silas Nightshade, ruler of the Northern Territories, the most powerful wolf in existence. And she had his son. "Your Majesty," Jade managed, her voice barely above a whisper as she dropped to her knees in the snow. Protocol demanded it, even from rogues, even from the rejected, especially from them. Silas said nothing for a long moment, his gaze moving over her with an intensity that felt like being flayed alive. She could feel him taking in everything, her threadbare clothes, her too thin frame, the cave behind her that screamed of poverty and desperation. "You're far from Packlands," he said finally, his voice like distant thunder, like the promise of storms. "What is your name, Wolf?" "Jade Winters, Your Majesty. I was—" She swallowed hard, shame burning in her throat. "I was cast out from the Silver Moon Pack." "Rejected," Silas said, and it wasn't a question. He could smell it on her, the severed bond that left a scent like ashes and mourning. "For what reason?" "I was deemed unworthy." The words tasted like poison, but she forced them out. "Weak, barren, not fit to be a Luna." Something flickered across Silas's face, too quick to read. Behind him, some of the warriors shifted uncomfortably. The rejection of a mate was considered a private shame, not something to be discussed openly, especially not before a king. 3 weeks ago, Silas continued, his voice carefully controlled. "My son disappeared during a hunting trip. He was found attacked by rogues, barely alive. In the chaos, he escaped into the forest and vanished. We've been searching ever since." Jade's mind raced. 3 weeks. She had found Ghost, found Prince Cade, nearly a month ago, which meant he had survived alone for days before she discovered him. "My men tracked his scent here," Silas said, and now there was something dangerous in his voice, something that made her wolf whimper in submission. "To your cave. And I find myself curious, Jade Winters, about what exactly I will discover inside." This was it, the moment where her life would end or transform, and she had no power to determine which. Jade lifted her head, meeting his eyes directly even though every instinct screamed to look away. "Your son is alive, Your Majesty," she said clearly. "I found him in the snow, wounded and dying. I've been caring for him, healing him." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the crackling of torches and the whisper of snow falling through branches. "You've had my son for a month," Silas said softly, and soft was more terrifying than rage would have been. "And you didn't think to send word?" "I didn't know who he was," Jade replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "And I'm a rogue, Your Majesty. Even if I had known, no pack would have allowed me to approach their borders. I would have been killed before I could explain." It was the truth, stark and ugly. Rogues had no rights, no protections. They existed in the spaces between pack laws, neither wolf nor fully human, belonging nowhere. Silas studied her for another endless moment, then gestured to one of his warriors. "Check the cave. Carefully." The warrior moved past her, torch held high, and disappeared into the darkness. Jade's heart climbed into her throat as she heard Ghost's distinctive whine, the soft growl that meant he was frightened. "It's all right," she called out, not caring how it looked. "Ghost, it's all right. They're here to help." "Ghost?" Silas repeated, something unreadable in his tone. The warrior emerged carrying Ghost, who was squirming in his arms, trying to get back to Jade. When the cub saw his father, he went still, his golden eyes widening. Silas took 3 long strides forward and gathered his son into his arms with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so fierce. He buried his face in Ghost's silver fur, his shoulders shaking with emotion too powerful to contain. "Cade," he whispered, his voice breaking. "My son." Jade watched through tears she didn't realize were falling, watched as a king transformed into simply a father who had thought his child was lost forever. Some of the warriors turned away, giving their alpha privacy in his moment of vulnerability. When Silas finally looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears, and when he looked at Jade, there was something in his gaze that made her breath catch. "You saved my son," he said. I couldn't let him die alone." The words came out small, honest. "I know what that feels like." Silas handed Cade to another warrior, his movements careful, reluctant. Then he walked toward Jade, and she braced herself for judgment, for punishment, for whatever fate awaited rogues who dared to touch royalty. Instead, he knelt in the snow before her, bringing himself to her level. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at his temples, the scars that marked him as a warrior long before he became a king. "Jade Winters," he said formally, "you have shown my son more kindness than many who bear the title of Pack Wolf. You gave him warmth when you had little, food when you were hungry, care when you yourself were suffering. These are not the actions of someone weak or unworthy." His hand reached out, and she flinched instinctively, but his touch was gentle as he lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Whatever Alpha rejected you was a fool," Silas said quietly, for her ears alone. "And I do not tolerate fools." Something passed between them in that moment, electric and undeniable. Jade felt it like lightning in her veins, like the earth shifting beneath her feet. It wasn't the mate bond that had been severed and couldn't be replaced, but it was something, some recognition that sang in her bones and made her wolf raise its head for the first time in months. "Come with us," Silas said, rising and extending his hand. "Return to the royal court. Let me repay the debt I owe you." Jade stared at his hand, at the olive branch that felt more like a lifeline. Part of her wanted to refuse, to retreat back into her cave in the safety of isolation. But Ghost Cade was watching her with those knowing eyes, and she remembered her promise. "You won't die today. None of them would. Not if she was brave enough to accept this impossible gift." She placed her hand in his, and Silas pulled her to her feet with effortless strength. His hand was warm, calloused from swordwork and combat, and it engulfed hers completely. "I have nothing to bring," she said softly. "No possessions. No worth to offer a court." "You have yourself," Silas replied, and there was something fierce in his voice. "And that, Jade Winters, is more than enough." The journey to the royal court took 3 days, and with each mile, Jade felt herself moving further from the wolf she had been, and closer to some unknown future she couldn't yet imagine. They traveled by horseback, Jade sharing a mount with one of the warriors since she had no horse of her own. Cade rode in a specially made carrier on his father's saddle, his eyes constantly finding Jade as if to reassure himself she was still there. The first night, they made camp in a clearing protected by ancient standing stones. Jade sat slightly apart from the others, old habits of isolation hard to break, when Silas approached carrying 2 bowls of stew. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the space beside her. She nodded, too shocked to speak. Kings didn't sit with rogues. They didn't serve them food or seek out their company, but Silas did all these things with a naturalness that suggested he saw no barrier between them. "Cade has been asking for you," Silas said, handing her the bowl. "He won't settle until you say goodnight." Warmth bloomed in Jade's chest. "I'll go to him." "After you eat. You're too thin." There was no judgment in the words, only concern. "When did you last have a full meal?" Jade couldn't remember. Time in the wilderness had become fluid, marked only by survival and the needs of her small charge. "It doesn't matter," she said, taking a bite of the stew. It was rich and hot, and so delicious she had to close her eyes against the pleasure of it. Cade, he needed the food more." "You gave him your portions." Again, not a question. Silas had been piecing together her story from small details, from the way his son responded to her, from the state of her cave and her body. He was growing. He needed strength. And you didn't? Jade met his eyes, seeing genuine confusion there, as if he couldn't understand her logic. How could she explain that keeping another creature alive had been the only thing giving her own life meaning? I needed purpose more, she said finally, and Cade gave me that. Understanding dawned across Silas's face, followed by something that looked like pain. The rejection, he said quietly. How long ago? 3 months. 3 months that felt like 3 lifetimes. Marcus Thornwood is the Silver Moon Alpha, isn't he? When Jade nodded, Silas's jaw tightened. I've met him. Arrogant. Short-sighted. He rules through fear rather than respect. He wasn't always that way, Jade found herself saying. When we were young, before he became Alpha, he was kind, gentle. I thought... She stopped, shaking her head. It doesn't matter what I thought. It matters, Silas said with quiet intensity. Your thoughts matter, Jade. Your feelings matter. Never let anyone convince you otherwise again. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. She looked away, focusing on her stew, but she could feel his gaze on her, heavy with things unsaid. Why are you being kind to me? She asked finally. I'm no one. A rogue without pack or purpose. You're the woman who saved my son when she had every reason to save only herself, Silas replied. That makes you someone significant. Before Jade could respond, a small silver form bounded across the camp. Cade had escaped his handlers and now stood before them, tail wagging, a wolfish grin on his face. Silas laughed, the sound transforming his features from stern to boyish. Trouble, as always. Come here, you escape artist. But Cade trotted to Jade instead, placing his head in her lap with a contented sigh. She stroked his fur automatically, her touch sure and loving. He hasn't bonded with anyone like this since his mother died, Silas said softly, watching them. Not even me, if I'm honest. He was so young when we lost her, barely a year old. I thought perhaps he didn't remember what it felt like to be truly cared for by a mother figure. I'm not his mother, Jade protested. No, Silas agreed, but you gave him something just as precious. You gave him unconditional love when you had none to spare for yourself. That kind of selflessness is rare, Jade. In anyone, but especially in someone who has been treated as you have been. Cade yawned, showing small, sharp teeth, and curled up with his head still in Jade's lap. Within moments he was asleep, his breathing deep and even. He trusts you completely, Silas observed. Wolves, especially royal wolves, don't give their trust easily. Maybe he just recognizes another broken thing, Jade murmured, running her fingers through Cade's soft fur. Or maybe he sees what I see. Silas's voice was closer now, intimate in the darkness. Strength that has been tested beyond measure and didn't break. Beauty that exists despite suffering, not because of ignorance to it. Worth that has nothing to do with pack politics or bloodlines. Jade's breath caught. She looked up to find Silas watching her with an intensity that made her skin flush. Your Majesty. Silas, he corrected gently. When it's just us, call me Silas. That wouldn't be appropriate. Very little about this situation is appropriate by traditional standards, Silas said with a slight smile. I find I don't care. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead. Around them, the camp settled into sleep, warriors taking up posts at the perimeter. The world felt suspended, caught between what was and what might be. Eventually, Silas rose and carefully gathered his son into his arms. Cade barely stirred, completely trusting in his father's hold. Rest, Jade, Silas said. Tomorrow we reach the royal court, and I want you to be ready. Ready for what? His smile was mysterious, touched with something that might have been anticipation. For your life to change. The royal court was nothing like Jade had imagined. She had pictured something cold and forbidding, all stone walls and formal judgment. Instead, the palace rose from the forest like something grown rather than built, its towers reaching toward the sky like ancient trees, its walls covered in flowering vines despite the winter cold. Magic, she realized. The royal bloodline commanded magic that allowed life to flourish even in the depths of winter. They rode through gates carved with running wolves and protective runes, into courtyards where fountains flowed with water that never froze. Wolves in human and animal form moved through the grounds, all stopping to stare as their king returned with his lost son. Word had spread ahead of them, and by the time they reached the main steps, a crowd had gathered. Cheers erupted when they saw Cade, alive and well, his silver fur gleaming in the afternoon sun. Silas dismounted, Cade in his arms, and the crowd fell silent. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the courtyard. "My son has returned to us," he announced, "thanks to the courage and compassion of this woman." Jade Winters found Prince Cade dying in the snow and nursed him back to health, asking nothing in return, expecting no reward. She is to be honored as a hero of this court, and treated with the respect due to one who has saved royal blood. The crowd erupted again, but Jade barely heard it over the rushing in her ears. She felt exposed, every eye upon her, seeing her poverty, her status as a rejected Omega, her unworthiness on display. But then Silas was beside her, his hand on her lower back, steady and grounding. "Come," he said quietly, for her alone. "Let me show you to your rooms." The chambers he led her to were absurdly beautiful, with windows overlooking a garden kept perpetually in bloom by magic. There was a bed larger than her entire cave had been, covered in furs and silk. A wardrobe stood open, revealing more clothes than she had owned in her entire life. A private bathing room with a tub that could fit 3 people steamed invitingly. "This is too much," Jade whispered, overwhelmed. "I can't. I don't deserve—" "Stop," Silas said firmly, turning her to face him. His hands on her shoulders were gentle but unyielding. "Listen to me, Jade. You are not in the Silver Moon Pack anymore. You are not with wolves who made you feel small and worthless. Here, you are honored. Here, you are valued. And here, you will learn to see yourself the way I see you." "How do you see me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Silas's silver eyes held hers, and in them she saw reflected back something she hardly recognized. Someone strong. Someone worthy. Someone who mattered. "Like you're exactly where you're supposed to be," he said softly. The days that followed passed in a blur of new experiences and careful healing. Jade was assigned a personal attendant, a kind woman named Lyra, who never once questioned her presence or her worth. She was given clothes that fit properly, food that filled the hollow spaces in her body, and time to simply exist without the constant terror of survival. But more than any of that, she was given purpose. Cade refused to sleep anywhere but in her rooms, and Silas had allowed it with an indulgent smile that suggested he'd expected nothing less. The young prince followed Jade everywhere, his small form a constant shadow at her heels. She taught him things she had learned in the wilderness, how to track by scent alone, how to read the weather in the movement of clouds, how to find food when there seemed to be none. In return, Cade showed her the palace, leading her through secret passages and hidden gardens with the pride of a child sharing his favorite treasures. And always, Silas was there. Present in ways that felt both casual and deliberate, as if he was making space for her in his life without forcing her to take it. They took meals together in his private dining room, where formality gave way to genuine conversation. He asked about her life before the rejection, and she found herself sharing stories she thought she'd forgotten. Moments of joy from before everything fell apart. In return, Silas told her about his own mate Bond, his late wife Elena, who had died giving birth to Cade. "She was fierce," he said one evening, his eyes distant with memory. "Brilliant and brave and completely uninterested in royal politics. She wanted to be a healer, and she was extraordinary at it. She saved more lives than I can count. But not her own, Jade said quietly. No, not her own. Pain flickered across his face. The birth was complicated. She made the healers save Cade first, save him at any cost. By the time they stabilized him, she was too far gone. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, too small for the size of his loss. I was angry for a long time, Silas admitted. Angry at fate, at the moon goddess, at Elena for leaving me alone to raise our son. But Cade looks so much like her. He has her spirit, her fearlessness. And I realized that she left me the greatest gift she could, a piece of herself that would never leave. He looked at Jade then, and something in his gaze made her heart stutter. I thought I would never feel anything for anyone again, he said. I thought the part of me that could care had died with Elena. And then you walked out of that cave, this small, fierce woman who had given everything to save a child that wasn't hers, and I felt something shift. Silas, Jade began, fear and hope warring in her chest. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. Your mate bond was rejected. I know the pain that leaves, the scars. I just need you to know that you have value beyond what you gave to Cade. You have value because you exist, Jade. Because you are who you are. Tears burned in her eyes. No one has ever said anything like that to me. Then everyone who came before me was a fool. He reached across the table, his hand open in invitation. Jade stared at it for a long moment, then slowly, carefully, placed her hand in his. The touch was electric, sending sparks up her arm and into her chest where her broken mate bond had left a hollow ache. It wasn't the same as that bond, nothing could be, but it was something. A connection that felt chosen rather than fated, built from respect and understanding rather than biological imperative. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to trust again. How to believe this is real and not just a dream I'll wake from. One day at a time, Silas said, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. One moment at a time. There's no rush, Jade. I've waited 5 years since Elena died. I can wait as long as you need. But even as he said it, they both felt time pressing against them, urgent and insistent. Because word had spread about the rogue Omega living in the royal court, and not all the reactions had been positive. The challenge came on a cold morning when frost painted the windows in crystalline patterns. Jade was in the garden with Cade, teaching him to identify different plants, when a commotion at the gates drew their attention. A contingent of wolves from the Silver Moon Pack had arrived, led by none other than Marcus himself. Jade's blood turned to ice. She pulled Cade closer instinctively, her body moving between him and the approaching group, even though they were still far away. Jade? Cade looked up at her, sensing her fear. What's wrong? Nothing, she lied, her voice barely steady. Go find your father. Tell him the Silver Moon Pack is here. Cade hesitated, his young face creased with worry, but then he bounded off toward the palace, moving with the preternatural speed of royal blood. By the time Marcus and his wolves reached the garden entrance, Silas was already there, with Cade at his side and a contingent of royal guards behind him. The Alpha King's face was impassive, but his eyes burned with cold fire. Alpha Marcus, Silas said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You enter my territory without invitation. Explain yourself. Marcus bowed, the gesture technically correct, but somehow managing to convey insolence. Your Majesty, I come seeking something that belongs to my pack. A rogue who escaped punishment for crimes against pack law. Jade's stomach dropped. She knew immediately what this was, what Marcus intended. Jade Winters is under my protection, Silas said flatly. She saved my son's life. Whatever grievance you have with her is meaningless compared to the debt I owe. The debt you owe doesn't change what she is, Marcus replied, his eyes finally finding Jade across the garden. She saw triumph in them, and malice. A rejected wolf who refused to leave pack territory when ordered, who stole resources meant for true pack members. Who? Lies, Jade heard herself say, stepping forward even though every instinct screamed to hide. I left the territory as commanded. I took nothing but what was already mine. Marcus smiled, and it was a terrible expression. Did you? Then explain how pack supplies went missing in the weeks after your departure, how hunting grounds were disturbed, how— Enough. Silas's voice cracked like a whip. You come to my court with accusations but no proof. You demand I hand over someone under my protection based on your word alone. Do you take me for a fool, Marcus? The Silver Moon Alpha bristled. I take you for a king who's been manipulated by a clever Omega. She's done this before, played on sympathy, made herself seem pitiful and in need of rescue. But I know the truth of what she is. Manipulative. Barren. Worthless. Each word landed like a physical blow, reopening wounds Jade thought had begun to heal. She felt herself shrinking, becoming small again, the rejected wolf who had been deemed unworthy by the man Moon Goddess had chosen for her. But then Silas moved, so fast he was a blur, and suddenly he had Marcus by the throat, lifting the other alpha off his feet with inhuman strength. You will not speak of her that way, Silas growled, his voice gone rough with wolf. His eyes glowed molten silver, power radiating from him in waves that made the very air tremble. Not in my territory. Not in my presence. Not ever. Marcus clawed at Silas's hand, his face turning red, but the king didn't release him. You rejected your mate, Silas continued, his words precise despite the fury in them, which is your right under pack law. But you do not get to continue punishing her for existing after you cast her out. You do not get to track her down and make false accusations to assuage whatever guilt festers in your miserable soul. He released Marcus then, letting him drop to the ground, gasping. Here are your options, Silas said, his voice returning to its normal register but losing none of its steel. You can leave my territory now and never speak Jade's name again. Or you can challenge her right to sanctuary here, in which case you'll have to go through me. Choose quickly. Marcus climbed to his feet, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. His eyes found Jade again, and she saw the promise of vengeance there, the vow that this wasn't over. She's not worth this, Your Majesty, Marcus said. She'll disappoint you like she disappointed everyone else who was foolish enough to care for her. Then it will be my disappointment to bear, Silas replied coldly. Leave. Now. The Silver Moon wolves retreated, but slowly, their body language making clear that this was strategic withdrawal rather than true defeat. Jade watched them go with a sense of dread settling in her chest like ice. When they were finally gone, Silas turned to her. She expected anger, or at least frustration at being drawn into her past drama. Instead, she saw only concern. Are you all right? He asked gently. Jade nodded, not trusting her voice. Her hands were shaking and she couldn't seem to make them stop. Come here. Silas closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her with a care that made her chest ache. She felt Cade press against her legs, offering his own comfort, and something inside her cracked open. She cried then, not the silent tears of grief, but great heaving sobs that felt like they were tearing her apart from the inside out. Silas held her through it, one hand in her hair, the other pressed against her back, keeping her anchored when she felt like she might fly apart. He's right, she gasped between sobs. I am worthless. I couldn't even give him what an Omega is supposed to. I couldn't— Stop, Silas commanded, pulling back enough to cup her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. Stop believing the lies of someone who was too weak to appreciate what he had. You are not worthless, Jade. You are not barren. That was a lie he told to justify what he wanted to do anyway. And you are not any of the things he called you. How do you know? The question came out broken. Because I've spent weeks watching you, Silas said fiercely. "Watching how you care for Cade, how you speak to the servants, how you move through the palace like you're afraid to take up space. I've seen your strength, your compassion, your capacity for love that you give freely despite having been given so little yourself. Those are not the qualities of a worthless wolf, Jade. Those are the qualities of someone extraordinary." "You barely know me," she protested weakly. "I know enough, and every day I want to know more." His thumbs traced the tears on her cheeks with infinite gentleness. "Stay, Jade. Not just as Cade's caretaker. Not just as someone I owe a debt. Stay because you want to. Stay because here you can heal. Stay because—" He stopped himself, swallowing hard, some emotion too powerful to name flickering across his face. "Because what?" Jade whispered. "Because I'm falling for you," Silas admitted, his voice rough with honesty. "And I know it's too soon. I know you need time. I know your mate bond was rejected, and that leaves scars that may never fully heal. But I can't not tell you. I can't watch you think you're worthless when you're the most valuable thing I've found in 5 years of darkness." Jade stared at him, her mind reeling. This was impossible. Kings didn't fall for rejected omegas. Powerful alphas didn't want wolves that others had discarded. And yet here he was, the most powerful wolf in the realm, looking at her like she hung the moon. "I'm broken," she said finally. "Marcus broke me when he rejected the bond. I don't know if I can feel that way about someone again." "I'm not asking you to," Silas said. "I'm not asking for a mate bond or a magical connection or fate to decide for us. I'm asking if you might want to try something different. Something chosen. Something built slowly, carefully, between two people who have both known loss." "That sounds terrifying," Jade admitted. "It is," Silas agreed with a slight smile. "But so is everything worth doing." Cade whined between them, and they both looked down to find him staring up at them with those two knowing eyes, his tail wagging hopefully. "I think he's voting yes," Silas observed. Jade laughed, the sound surprising her, rusty from disuse but genuine. She reached down to ruffle Cade's fur, then looked back at Silas, at this impossible man offering her an impossible future. "I can't promise anything," she said carefully. "I don't know if I'll ever be whole again. If I'll ever be able to give you what you deserve." "You don't owe me anything," Silas replied. "Just the chance to prove that you deserve to be happy, that you deserve to be chosen. Can you give me that?" It was such a small thing he asked, when he could have demanded everything. Just a chance. Just an opportunity to try. Jade thought about the cave in the woods, about endless nights of cold and hunger and loneliness. She thought about Ghost, about how saving him had saved her in return. She thought about the possibility of a future that didn't hurt, of days filled with something other than survival. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I can give you that." The seasons turned, winter giving way to spring with the kind of beauty that felt like a promise. The palace gardens exploded into bloom, and Jade spent hours there with Cade, watching him grow from a small cub into a young wolf with his mother's spirit and his father's strength. Silas courted her with a patience that made her chest ache. He brought her flowers from the garden, asked about her day, sat with her in comfortable silence when words felt like too much. He never pushed, never demanded more than she could give, and in that safety, Jade began to unfold like a flower long kept in darkness. They took walks through the forest together, sometimes just the two of them, sometimes with Cade bounding ahead. Silas showed her the borders of his territory, the places where magic ran strongest, the ancient trees that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless alpha kings. "This is my burden," he told her one afternoon as they stood on a cliff overlooking his vast lands. "To protect all of this, to keep the wolves under my rule safe and fed and free. Sometimes the weight of it feels unbearable." "But you bear it anyway," Jade observed. "Because I must. Because there's no one else." He glanced at her then, something vulnerable in his eyes. But it's easier now, knowing you're there at the end of the day, knowing I can talk to you about the challenges, the fears. Elena used to do that, used to be my sounding board and my conscience. I thought I'd never have that again. I'm not her, Jade said quietly. No, Silas agreed. You're not. You're you. And that's what makes this so extraordinary. I'm not trying to replace what I lost, Jade. I'm trying to build something new. He took her hand, and the touch no longer sent shock waves of panic through her. Instead, it felt grounding, right in a way that had nothing to do with fate and everything to do with choice. I know I'm not whole, Jade said, voicing the fear that lived in her chest. The rejection, it left scars. Sometimes I wake up and I feel the echo of where the mate bond used to be, and it hurts so much I can't breathe. I know, Silas said gently. I feel the same thing where my bond with Elena was. Loss leaves marks, Jade. But marks don't mean we're broken beyond repair. They mean we survived something difficult. And we're still here, still trying. Do you think? She hesitated, afraid to voice the hope growing in her heart. Do you think we could really be happy? Even without the mate bond? Even with our pasts? Silas pulled her closer, his arm around her waist, and pointed to where Cade was chasing butterflies through a meadow below them. I think happiness isn't one big thing, he said. It's moments, like watching my son play without fear, like knowing you're beside me, like the way you laugh when you think no one's listening, like it's something secret and precious. You notice when I laugh? I notice everything about you, Silas admitted. The way you bite your lip when you're nervous. How you always check on Cade one more time before you sleep. The small smile you get when you're reading something that pleases you. I notice it all, Jade, and I want to keep noticing for as long as you'll let me. Jade turned to face him fully, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart beating beneath her palms, strong and steady. I'm scared, she confessed, of trusting this, of believing it's real, of letting myself care and then losing everything again. I'm scared too, Silas said, his honesty a gift. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone. Wouldn't you? It was the truth she'd been avoiding, the realization that had been building in her heart for weeks. She was tired of being safe. She was tired of protecting herself from pain by refusing to feel anything at all. She wanted to feel. She wanted to risk. She wanted to live. Yes, she said, and it felt like jumping off a cliff into unknown waters. Yes, I would rather be with you. Silas's smile was incandescent, transforming his usually stern features into something boyish and unguarded. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, when she rose on her toes to meet him, his kiss was gentle as falling snow. It wasn't the explosive passion of a mate bond snapping into place. It was softer, sweeter, a question and an answer all at once. Jade felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that came when something inside you that was frozen finally began to thaw. When they pulled apart, Silas rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I know it soon, I know we're still learning each other, but I do. I love your strength and your gentleness. I love how you care for my son like he's yours. I love that you chose to keep living even when living hurt too much to bear. I love you, Jade Winters. The words settled over her like a benediction, like a spell that rewrote something fundamental in her soul. Marcus had rejected her, had told her she was unworthy of love. But here was Silas, powerful and ancient and king of all he surveyed, telling her she was exactly what he wanted. She started, then stopped, the words catching in her throat. Love was terrifying. Love had hurt her so badly before. But this felt different. This felt like something she was building brick by brick, rather than something forced upon her by fate. You don't have to say it back, Silas said quickly. Not until you're ready. Not until you're sure. But Jade shook her head. She thought about the past months, about how Silas had given her space and time and respect, how he'd defended her against Marcus, how he'd made room for her in his life and his son's life, without asking for anything in return. I love you too, she said, and the words felt like freedom. I'm scared and scarred, and I don't know if I'll ever be fully healed, but I love you, Silas. I choose to love you. His answering smile was brilliant as the sun, and when he kissed her again, deeper this time, Jade felt something inside her chest where the broken mate bond had left a hollow space. It wasn't a bond, not in the traditional sense, but it was something. A connection forged in choice and time and shared pain that had transformed into shared joy. It wasn't what she'd expected love to feel like, but it was real and it was hers, and that made it more precious than any bond fate could have given her. They stayed on that cliff until sunset painted the sky in shades of fire and gold, and when they descended, Cade ran to meet them, his joyous howls echoing through the valley like a song. The challenge to Jade's presence in the court came not from outside enemies, but from within, from wolves who believed that a rejected Omega had no place beside their king. It started as whispers, rumors that Jade was using some kind of manipulation to control Silas, that she'd bewitched the young prince. The whispers grew louder until they could no longer be ignored, until finally, at a formal court gathering, one of the high-ranking nobles spoke openly. Your Majesty, Lady Helena said, her voice carrying through the great hall. We must address the situation with the Omega. It is unseemly for someone of her status to hold such influence over the crown prince. What message does it send to have a rejected wolf living in the palace as if she were Pack? Jade stood beside Silas's throne, Cade at her feet, and felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Old shame tried to rise up, the instinct to make herself small, to apologize for existing. But then Silas's hand found hers, his grip strong and sure. What message does it send? Silas repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. It sends the message that in my court, we value character over circumstance, that we honor loyalty, compassion, and courage regardless of Pack politics, that here, a wolf's worth is not determined by what others say about them, but by who they choose to be. But Your Majesty, another noble spoke up. Pack law? Pack law, Silas interrupted, rising from his throne, says that an alpha has the right to choose his mate. Pack law says that the ruler of a territory decides who belongs within it. Pack law says that I, as Alpha King, have absolute authority within these borders. Or are you suggesting that Pack law should only apply when it suits your prejudices? Silence fell, heavy and uncomfortable. No one dared challenge their king directly, but Jade could feel the resentment simmering beneath the surface. I have a solution, she said quietly, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. If my presence here is so objectionable, I can leave. I never wanted to cause problems for anyone. No. Silas's voice was absolute, and when Jade looked at him, she saw a king in his full power. You're not going anywhere. But if there are those here who cannot accept you, who cannot see what I see, then perhaps they are the ones who should reconsider their place in this court. Your Majesty, Lady Helena said, her tone shifting to something almost pleading. We're only concerned for the stability of the realm. A king must have a true mate, someone of proper standing, not what? Jade heard herself say, her voice growing stronger. Not someone who was rejected? Not someone deemed worthless by wolves who couldn't see past their own narrow definitions of value? She stepped forward, away from the safety of Silas's side, addressing the assembled court directly. I was rejected, she said, letting the words ring clear. My mate decided I wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't worthy enough to stand beside him, and he was right in a way. I wasn't worthy of standing beside someone so small-minded, so cruel, so willing to discard something precious because it didn't fit his image of perfection. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Jade pressed on. I lived alone in the wilderness for months, starving and freezing, wanting to die. But then I found a dying cub in the snow and I saved him. Not because I thought there would be a reward, not because I knew he was a prince, but because leaving another creature to die alone was unthinkable to me. She felt Silas's presence at her back, supporting her without overshadowing. If that makes me unworthy of being here, Jade continued, if choosing compassion over self-preservation is a flaw in your eyes, then yes, I am deeply flawed. But I would rather be flawed and kind than perfect and cruel. I would rather be rejected and true to myself than accepted and false to everything I believe. The hall was utterly silent now, every wolf hanging on her words. Your king has honored me with his love, Jade said, her voice softening as she looked back at Silas. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift. Not because of pack politics or bloodlines or any of the things you value, but because he chose to see me when everyone else looked away. And if that's not enough for you, then nothing I do ever will be. She turned back to the court, lifting her chin with a defiance born of surviving when survival seemed impossible. So yes, I am a rejected Omega living in the royal court. I am flawed and scarred and probably always will be. But I am also the woman who saved your prince. I am the woman your king loves, and I am not going anywhere. The silence that followed was profound, and Jade braced herself for condemnation, for the court to turn against her completely. Instead, someone began to clap, then another joined in, and another. Within moments, the entire hall was applauding, even those who had been most vocal in their objections seeming swayed by her words. Silas's arms came around her from behind, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. That, he murmured for her ears alone, is my queen. The coronation took place on the summer solstice, when magic ran strongest and the barriers between worlds grew thin. The ceremony was ancient, drawn from traditions that predated even the oldest wolves' memories. Jade stood in a chamber deep within the palace, surrounded by attendants who had been preparing her for hours. The dress they'd made for her was stunning, silver as moonlight, with embroidery that depicted running wolves and blooming flowers. It was fit for a queen, and the woman staring back at her from the mirror barely seemed real. Nervous? Lyra asked, adjusting the final details of Jade's hair. Terrified, Jade admitted. What if I'm not ready? What if I can't do this? You saved a dying prince in a snowstorm, Lyra said gently. You survived rejection and abandonment. You stood before a hostile court and spoke your truth with such courage that you turned enemies into allies. If you can do all that, you can do anything. A knock at the door announced Cade, who had apparently escaped his own preparations. He was no longer a small cub, but a young wolf in his prime, though he still looked at Jade with the same adoring eyes he'd had that first day in the snow. You look beautiful, he said, his voice that of a teenager now, caught between childhood and adulthood. Like a real queen. I am real, Jade said, pulling him into a hug. Just also terrified. Father's terrified too, Cade confided. I heard him pacing his chambers all night. He's afraid you'll change your mind. The idea of Silas, powerful and ancient and seemingly unshakable, being nervous about their joining made Jade's heart swell with affection. I'm not going to change my mind, she said firmly. This is what I want. He is what I want. You both are. Cade grinned, looking so much like his father in that moment it took her breath away. Good, because I already told everyone you're my mother. Would be awkward if you backed out now. Jade laughed, the sound genuine and free. So different from the broken creature she'd been just months ago. When had laughter become easy again? When had hope stopped feeling like a betrayal? The ceremony itself was held in the ancient grove at the heart of the palace grounds, where trees older than memory stood witness to vows spoken and promises made. The entire court was gathered, along with representatives from every pack in the northern territories. Jade walked down an aisle of white stones, and at the end stood Silas, dressed in black and silver, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and she felt the calluses on his palms, the strength in his fingers, the slight tremor that betrayed his emotion. The ceremony was conducted by the high priestess, an ancient wolf whose eyes held the wisdom of centuries. She spoke of bonds forged not by fate but by choice, of love that existed not because the moon goddess decreed it, but because two souls decided to walk the same path. Do you, Silas Nightshade, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, take this woman as your chosen mate? The priestess asked. Do you vow to honor her, protect her, cherish her, not because fate demands it, but because you choose it freely? I do, Silas said, his voice steady and sure. In this life and all that follow, by choice, not chance. By will, not fate. I choose Jade, today and always. The priestess turned to Jade. And do you, Jade Winters, take this man as your chosen mate? Do you vow to stand beside him, support him, love him, knowing that this bond is built by your own hand and can only be broken by your own will? Jade looked at Silas, at this impossible man who had seen past her scars to the strength beneath. She thought about Ghost in the snow, about the promise she'd made that day. You won't die today. That promise had saved them both, had led them here to this moment. I do, she said, her voice clear. I choose you, Silas. I choose this life we're building. I choose love over fear, hope over despair. I choose you, today and every day after. The priestess smiled, ancient and knowing. Then by the power vested in me by the old ways and the new, by moon and sun and earth and sky, I declare you bonded. Not by fate's hand, but by your own. May your choice bring you joy, and may your love light the darkness. She placed their joined hands over a silver bowl filled with water from the sacred spring, and as their blood mingled with the water, Jade felt something shift in her chest. Not the mate bond that would never return, but something just as powerful. A connection woven from choice and time and shared trials, stronger for being chosen rather than fated. Silas pulled her into his arms and kissed her as the crowd erupted in cheers, and Jade kissed him back with everything she had, pouring into it all her hope and fear and desperate, fierce love. When they finally pulled apart, Cade was there, his arms around both of them, and the three of them stood together as trumpets sounded and the court celebrated. Jade looked out at the assembled wolves, at faces that had gone from suspicious to accepting to genuinely joyful, and felt tears slip down her cheeks. Happy tears? Silas murmured. The happiest, Jade confirmed. I never thought I could feel this way again. Content, whole, home. You are home, Silas said fiercely, pulling her closer. You've been home since the moment you walked out of that cave. I just had to convince you to stay. The epilogue. 5 years later, the snow fell softly on the anniversary of the day Jade had found Ghost in the wilderness, and she stood in that same forest clearing with her family around her. Cade was grown now, a strong young wolf coming into his own power. He stood tall and proud, but he still looked at Jade with the same love he'd shown as a cub, still called her mother without hesitation. Silas's arm was around her waist, his presence as steady and grounding as it had been since the beginning. His hair had more silver in it now, his face marked with new lines, but his eyes still held the same fierce devotion. And in Jade's arms was a small bundle, a daughter born just 3 months ago with silver fur like her father and grandmother, and eyes that already held too much wisdom for such a young thing. She would have loved this spot, Jade said softly, looking around the clearing. Your mother. She would have appreciated the beauty of it. She would have loved you, Silas replied, for saving Cade, for saving me, for being exactly who you are. Jade thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, broken and rejected, thinking her life was over. That woman could never have imagined standing here, queen to the most powerful alpha in the realm, mother to 2 incredible children, loved beyond measure. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing me instead of finding someone else, someone without all my scars?" Silas turned her to face him, his hand cupping her cheek with infinite tenderness. "Never. Not for a single moment. Your scars are part of your story, Jade, and your story is what made you who you are. I love all of you, including the parts that hurt." Their daughter made a small sound, and Jade looked down to find those knowing eyes watching her. She thought about the promise she'd made in the snow all those years ago. "You won't die today." It had been a promise to a dying cub, but also to herself. A vow to keep fighting, keep surviving, keep hoping even when hope seemed impossible. She had kept that promise, and in keeping it, she had found not just survival, but a life worth living, a family worth fighting for, a love worth every risk. "Tell us the story, Mother," Cade said, coming to stand beside her. "Tell us about the day you found me." Jade smiled, settling into Silas's embrace as she began the tale they all knew by heart, the story of a rejected Omega and a dying prince, of promises made in snow and love built from choice rather than fate. As she spoke, the forest listened, and somewhere in the wind she heard the echo of her younger self, that broken woman who had knelt in the snow and refused to let death win. "You won't die today," she had said. And none of them had. Instead, they had lived. Fully, completely, courageously. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of their pain, and in doing so, they had proven that sometimes the best love stories aren't written by fate. Sometimes they're chosen, one brave moment at a time, by people willing to believe that happy endings are possible even after the worst beginnings. The snow continued to fall as they stood together in the clearing where it had all begun, and Jade held her family close and felt, finally and fully, at peace. She was no longer the rejected Omega, cast out and unwanted. She was Jade Nightshade, chosen queen, fierce mother, beloved mate. She was home. And that, she thought as Silas kissed her forehead and Cade laughed and their daughter cooed contentedly, was the greatest miracle of all. We want to hear your opinion about this beautiful fantasy story. Let us know what you thought of this plot full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you are watching from, and what score you would give this story from 0 to 10, a story that touched hearts. And if you enjoyed the storyline, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming up. See you next time.